Hey, what is going on, everybody? Bauer Brown here. Welcome back to the channel, guys, and welcome to the next video in the Blender tutorial series. Alrighty, so first and foremost, I want to throw this out there that I do apologize. You guys are going to have to bear with me. My voice is wonky today. That's all I can say is it's not cooperating. Most likely a byproduct of being sick, but it is what it is. I'm dealing with it and just trying to push forward without totally losing my voice. So, like I said, I apologize. Just bear with me and I'll do the best that I can. Secondly, I am recording this video on December 31st. We are on the cusp of New Year's Eve. There is every chance that I will release this video tonight. So, in that case, Happy New Year to everybody. I hope you have a very wonderful evening and an equally wonderful rest of the year. I hope the upcoming year, 2024, is just absolutely wonderful for you guys. So like I said, I want everybody to be safe and please be responsible on New Year's. That's all I can ask. That's I'm not even going to go into things with that. Just please safe and responsible. Not only that, but if anybody's downloaded any maps from Giants Mod Hub recently, you can see the state of those maps are just very disappointing. And I think the last thing that we need right now is you guys all liquored up on a bottle of Jim Beam and making maps. You can only imagine what's coming out next. Anyhow, all joking aside, like I said, please have a happy, safe, and responsible New Year's. And with that, let's just kind of get into things here. All right. So, my last video, we went over materials and I tried to impress upon you just how important materials are, right? Everything starts with a material, like just kind of goes without saying. All right. So, textures included. Now, the thing with materials, right? So, there's lots of different like defining elements that can make up a material, like a defining characteristic. So, if you take this wall that we're looking at here, for example, this is the wall that I created in one of my previous videos. If I want to give it a brick texture or a concrete texture or something like that, it starts with the material. All right. So, like I said, with the material, whether you want it to be smooth or bumpy, you want it to be shiny, you want it to have a texture, you want to include a shader, whatever you do, all of those elements together, wrapped up, are what entails a material, right? So that's what makes a material is all of those things wrapped up together, textures included. Now, with textures, you can have several textures that make up a single texture. Make any sense, really? It's kind of confusing to say, a handful of textures makes one. But if you think about it, like when you're in Giants Editor, so let me bring that up here for a second, really quickly. When I look at my textures here, all right, where am I at here? I'm looking at grass dry, but if I go through the list to get that combined texture of grass dry, there are several other. There's grass dry one, two, three, and four, and those four textures combined together make up that single combined grass dry texture. All right, well that's kind of the same thing here. When it comes to certain textures that we're going to be using, it's not just one texture; it's a bunch combined together. All right, so this can get out of hand really fast. Like I said, it can get confusing very quickly. So I'll do the best that I can to kind of walk you through this. You do the best that you can to follow along. All right. So, like I said, I'm going to break this down into a few different videos. I'm almost going to have to. There's just no way around it. There's just so much involved, right? You think of it like YouTube, right? YouTube has so much information. There's so much content on there that you can either watch just a little bit, whatever you're interested in, or you can really go down that rabbit hole and spend hours and hours and just keep going deeper. That's what textures are. I mean, you can just learn just bare basics, enough to get by, or you can just go down that rabbit hole and you'll spend months learning about textures. All right. So there are some things that we're going to have to cover terminology wise to knowing pretty much which textures are which, what do they do. It basically is the anatomy of a texture, right? So there's some terminology that's going to be thrown around that's helpful if you guys know what's going on and what's being talked about when those terms come up. All right. So in Giants, let's go back in the Giants editor. All right. So you can see I have a bunch of blank models down there. Those all need to be textured. So we got plenty of opportunity here to learn about textures. But if we just pick something that's currently out here right now, we take this house here, for example. Let me zoom in on this. All right. If I break this down and I opened up, let's see, my material editing window. All right. at its most basic form, you have three textures that make up a single. I guess I don't want to say material, but another texture, right? So we just kind of add them together to get that finished effect. So your diffuse, which is more or less what you can consider your base color, right? So that's the actual image itself. All right. So you got your diffuse, you got your gloss map, and your normal map. So you got three textures here that give you your finished product. All right. Maybe a better example would be if I head over to my texture folder in my base game, right? So let's go to data. Oops, let me get out of there. I'm already in there, but I'm going to data, maps, and this is the base game, map US, and then I'm going into textures. All right, these are this location here is where all of our base game textures are kept. Mostly for things like all your prefabs, your placeables, your buildings, things like that. All your terrain and ground textures, they're kept somewhere else. All right. Looking here, I have this company warehouse. Let's take this for example. All right. So you can see here that I have this is my diffuse. All right. Now this diffuse is broken down into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different textures. All right. This is what they call a texture atlas. Okay. And that's basically just a lump of textures all sharing the same sheet. So 7 different textures. And it's more to save space to kind of to help on resources, right? Because if it wasn't for that, this whole project can get bloated very quickly. File size is just huge. Now you have 7 different textures, right? Instead of just this one, you have 7 of them that you would have to have just to make up this one sheet. And then we use the normal and the specular map. So do the math on that. Right there, you have 21 textures instead of just these three. There's the specular, this normal, and just this diffuse. So, like I said, the diffuse is like your base texture. Just think about that as like a raw image. Like when you take a picture with your camera, that's what comes out is your diffuse. All right. Now you can create a normal map. Now a normal map is basically just it's kind of like a trick of the eye. Basically, you can create a texture that makes it look like you can think of it. It's kind of like a trick of the eye. Basically, it's tricking the eye, I should say, like a boss relief sort of. It makes this diffuse texture look like it has like a raised quality to it, right? So it gives it kind of a 3D effect. So it doesn't look so flat anymore, right? So it gives a little bit of height to it, a little bit of bumpiness. Some people call it a bump map, but that's what it does. It just kind of gives it like a instead of being completely smooth, now it has a little bit more texture to it, actual texture, like 3-dimensional texture. Even though it hasn't done anything to the actual surface of the model to make it 3D, it tricks your eye into, believing that, there's a little bit more going on there than what there really is. Now, the specular is kind of a different case, right? So if any of you guys are familiar with actually creating these textures, right, there's a program called Materialize, which we will go over this in one of these videos. We'll go over it. But you could take this diffuse texture, throw it in there, right? And you can create a normal map from that texture, which is very useful, very nice. And you can create other maps, like you can create, your ambient occlusion, a bunch of other maps you can make, but it does not give you the opportunity to create a specular map. Now, why would that be? All right, it's here. I'm looking at it. There's obviously it's a specular. Why can't I create that? Is that specific to just giants? Because it's not. There's lots of different applications that include a specular map. So why can we not create one? All right. Well, this is another term that I want to throw at you. It's called channel packing. All right. Each one of these textures is made up of an RGB. They all have a channel, the red, the green, and the blue. If you were to throw those into an application like Photoshop or GIMP or something like that, you can see the individual color channels, right? Well, those channels, obviously the red, green, and blue is combined what makes what you see here, but you can manipulate those channels in different fashions. Well, this specular map is the way we end up with this map is we manipulate those channels. We take 3 different maps. We take your smoothness, your ambient occlusion, and your metalness. And when I say metalness, I don't mean, how much you love Iron Maiden. Not that, right? So you take your metalness and you combine those together into the respective RGB channels, right? And that's what makes this specular map. And I'll show you how to make one because it doesn't give you the option, but you can make those 3 other maps, right? The smoothness, the ambient occlusion, and the metalness. So that's how you came up with that. It's called channel packing. Giants does it quite often. They do it with lots of different textures. You can do it with the alpha channel if you have an alpha channel and involved, some sort of transparency or opacity or something going on with your texture. You can include an alpha channel, so you can have textures packed into there as well. But that's what they mean by texture packing, right? Or channel packing is they're taking three different textures and they're putting in them into the respective RGB channels and they're creating a new texture out of that. And again, it's again to save on resources, to keep things from getting too bloated, too big, keep everything down, right? And it's a good way to do it. Now, as much as humanly possible, I can't say as much as humanly possible, but I do try to use the Giants textures as much as I can, right? Just like I tell you guys when it comes to prefabs, placeables, that sort of thing, try to use a lot of the base game objects because it keeps things down to a minimum. Don't worry about getting on the internet and downloading different mods and everything else. Just use the stuff that Giants throws at you, and it keeps things, to a decent file size so your map doesn't get so bloated. And plus, all the work has already been done for you. The texture is already created, the normal maps are created, the specular is created, right? So that saves a lot of work for you guys. You don't have to recreate those things. All right. So, like I said, the diffuse map, think of that as your base color. Your normal map just gives some kind of like a texture to it, like a bumpiness or like a boss relief type thing. And then your specular is how glossy it is, stuff like that, right? So think about it like shininess. How shiny is it? Is it very shiny? Is it not so shiny? How metal is it? Is it a very metal object? Not so metal? It controls those aspects of the texture. Now, you do have two other textures that get used sometimes, and it is only in the US map and the French map. For those of you who are completely dedicated to the Alpine map, I'm sorry you don't have this option with any textures in the Alpine map, but they do for FS22. They started using what's called parallax occlusion. They started using that pretty heavily. And that's just another way to think about like a normal map on steroids, right? They step it up like 10 notches. It's another way to get more height detail, out of your image, right? So that normal brick wall image really starts to take on like a brick look to it, right? And they do not do that on the Alpine map. It's only on the French map and the US map. So, like I said, you're a diehard Alpine map fan, you might be missing out a little bit because you don't have that option unless you're making your own maps, is what it is. All right. So this height that you see here, that is part of that parallax occlusion when they add when you can add a height map to that. All right. Next thing we have here is a company warehouse mask. Now this is a mask of the whole building, and it looks, you know, pretty similar to your specular map, and in some ways it kind of is, kind of. But you can see that there's some blue and there's some red, different colors in this one, right? It's just not the straight, green that you see here. And those blue and red, respectively, are a moss and a dirt. So when you look at some of the objects that we have here inside of Giants Editor, right? So you can look down here, and here's what just a basic clean shingle roof would look like right here. Okay. But then when we move up top here a little bit more, you can see that it gets a little more cruddier. It looks dirty. It looks, a little green, like it's been rained on. It's been weathered. It went through the weather. That's what that mask does. Okay. Gives everything that old look to it, that's weathered feel. Now, that mask is a pain. It is not easy to create. And maybe it's not as difficult for some people, but I think it's a huge pain. And I haven't included it on maybe but one or two of my buildings so far. That's how much of a pain that it is. If I find it, there is easier ways to do it and there's harder ways. It depends upon the resources that you have available to you. Okay. If you're only using Blender and free programs, it gets a little more difficult. But if you get into like Substance Painter, stuff like that, it gets a lot easier. Depends on the resources you have available to you. Without that mask, right? So a lot of it's done through the textures. So you can see like this garage here, it looks dirty. And it's not all the mask. Some of it's the texture itself that gives it that dirty look, the old weathered look. But if you look at this garage that I have here, right? Now, this garage was built all off of base game textures, all of this. There's no custom textures in here. This is all Giants textures, but you can see how clean it looks. Looks like it was just painted last week, right? And this thing's been sitting out in the sun and the rain and the snow and everything that goes on in this area. No, it's been through its paces. It's been through the weather, and it should look weathered, but it does not, right? So without that mask, you get these really clean looking buildings here that really look like they can use a little bit, they can use a little bit more weathered look to it, right? But we'll go over all this, and I'll show you the ways, that these things are made, and you can kind of take that project on upon yourself, whether or not you want to get into, creating masks and stuff that give it that weathered look. All right, but at its most basic form, this is what you get. This is a garage here at its most basic, right? It's got the normal, the specular. I believe I do use the height map, just not the mask. That weather mask that you see there for the dirt and the I guess you can call it that, a dirt mask, I guess you can say. It does not use that because it just requires a lot of extra work, and it's not all so easy. All right, so that was the anatomy of the texture itself. Like I said, there's three basic components: specular, normal, diffuse, and then you can keep going up from there, right? We have ambient occlusion, which does something different. You have metalness, that does something different. Sometimes you have a roughness. Sometimes you have an edge map. So there's a lot of different textures that you can use to create one finished product. All right, but we're only going to focus on these three for now: specular, normal, diffuse, and maybe a little bit later on, we'll get into the height and possibly the mask. We'll start, doing something with the parallax occlusion. Okay. So the very next thing that we want to do is we want to be able to take those textures, right? Those base game textures, and we want to bring that into our model. So I want to include those on the brick wall that I have here. Well, it's not a brick wall yet, it's just the wall, but I want to bring those into Blender so I can include it with this wall, whatever textures I pick. In this case, I think I want it to be brick. Okay, so like I said, everything starts with the material. And right now, for this wall that I have going on here, I have just the basic material. So if I was to hit select, you can see that every part of that wall lights up, right? And that's not necessarily what I want. I want this top part to be cement. I want this bottom part to be some kind of cement, and I want the middle to be brick. All right. So now whether or not I need separate materials depends on the texture that I'm going to use. Okay. And what I mean by that is here where you can see you have a color atlas, or not a color atlas, a texture atlas. If I'm using two different textures from the same atlas, I only need one material. I don't need two materials for that. I'm just telling it I want to include this texture along with, the specular and the normal. All right. For Giants Editor, you only really need, within Blender, you only really need the diffuse. I include them all, but for now, that's all that you really need. And I'll explain that once we start exporting objects into Giants Editor, and I'll show you how to straighten some of these things out. But for the sake of the video, we will include them all. Now, I just want to show you how to get these in here. There's a really hard way, and there's a really easy way. Now, the hard way, first, let's back up. First, we need to make our material, and we have one here, right? So I'm going to name this one. I'm just going to rename it, and I'll rename it, let's just say brick. Even though that might not be a fitting name if I'm using a texture atlas and it has wood, it has brick, it has lots of other things. Normally, I name it after whatever atlas I'm using, right? So if I'm using something from Giants Editor and it happens to be like Baseball Center, that's what I'll name it. This way I know what to look for next time, when I'm working inside a Blender. I need to refer back to that texture. That's how I'm going to do it. All right, by looking at what I have here. But either way, there is a brick texture inside of Giants that I want to use, and we're going to grab that. So like I said, you could either go over here to where it says base color, and then you can click image texture, right? And then you can go to open and go find that texture that you want. So that's one way to do it. The other way is inside the shading tab. So you can see, since I did that, it added an image texture here for me, right? And I know in my last video, I was telling you to hit Control and Shift when you're hovering over top of this lower window or the upper window, and that will expand the window for you. It's Control and Space. I realized that after I released a video that I was goofing that one up. All right, and of course X you can delete. You can delete nodes if you need to. Let me see if this will let me. Yeah, it doesn't let me bring my little fancy mouse up there. All right, so these nodes, just like your controls, are the same as they would be inside of your viewport there, right? So middle mouse button lets you move around individually. You can grab these objects and you can just use your left mouse button to click and drag. Very simple, right? Now these nodes, like I said, they can be confusing, but don't let them intimidate you. Think of it like a deck of, like, say, playing cards, right? So every card has a different value. Everything does something different, right? So depending on what you're looking to do, depends on which card you play, right? So if you're looking to, I don't know, create a full house, you would select certain cards, right? So you wouldn't just throw down any old card. Certain cards, have different values. They do certain things. If you wanted a straight flush, you would choose the appropriate card. Same thing here, right? So you want to add a texture, like you want to add an image texture to this, then you have to add, play your image texture card. So you can either shift A to grab a new node. You can go up top here to add. All right. So I'm going to go to shift A and I'm going to go down here to where it says texture. And then I'm going to pick image texture, drag that up, just drop it there. All right. Then I'm going to go to open. All right. From here, you want to go all the way into drill down until you see your farming simulator folder. So you want to go into data, and then you want to go into maps. Oh, where am I at? I'm losing myself here. There we go, maps. And then you want to go into map US if that's the folder you want. Go into textures. And I can drill down until I find this brick texture that I'm looking for, which is right there. Okay. Now, since this one, like I said, your diffuse is the only one that gets RGB for your color space. All of your other ones will get, as far as your normal map and your specular, will get what's called non-color. All right. So you have this picked out, and all you have to do is drag this color into your base color. All right. And now you can see I have that brick texture on my wall. Now, obviously, it's too big. The bricks are pointing in the right or in the wrong direction. But we'll straighten that out later with our UV map. That's probably going to be in the next video, just so this doesn't drag on and on. All right. Now, as far as including these textures like that, there's a little bit more to it and some research that needs to be done. If you want to include a normal map, right, it's kind of the same thing. Like if you look at what we have here, we would go into Shift A, right, and then we would go to texture, we would go to image texture, right, put that down, go to open. Same thing where you have to drill through, go all the way back to your folder there, to your textures folder. Go into data, go into maps, map US, go into textures. All right, let me get down here to normal map. All right, so I'll grab my brick wall normal, open image. Now, this is a mistake that I made off the beginning. Right off the bat, I was making this mistake because I didn't know. First, I didn't know that this color space needed to be non-color. So let's put that over to non-color. And I was just taking this color here and plugging it into normal. Okay, so if I go back, have a look, it doesn't look like it did anything. It looks shiny and white. It doesn't really look right. Something's not right with that. Right. So if I zoom this in, I can start playing around with different aspects of it. Oops. See if anything makes a difference. Maybe if I go to RGB instead, we can try color. Yeah, no, it really didn't do anything. Still looks shiny. So it took some research on my behalf to know what was going on here, right? To get this figured out. First, more often than not in every single case, but more often than not, these dots, these plugs will match up. So yellow to yellow, purple to purple. And here I got a yellow going into purple. So, that doesn't work. Something goes in between, right? So you can see it definitely had an effect when I unplugged it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift A. I'm going to go into search, and I'm going to pick this normal map here, right? So let's move things over a little bit. Take this color, and I'm going to plug that into the color here. And then I'm just going to plug the normal into the normal here. And then there you go. Now we have what I consider a normal map, right? There's actually even a little bit more to it than that. But at its most basic form, that would work okay for what we're trying to achieve here. Like I said, none of this is actually even completely necessary because we can do all of this within Giants Editor. We just need that material, and all the textures we can take care of from there. Now, like I said, this gets to be confusing, right? Knowing, what you need to pick, color, non-color. Do you need this normal map? If you're going with your height map, if you want to include a height map, you need a displacement node. First, you need to know all these things, which isn't common sense, not all the time, right? You have to do a lot of research, figure out how to include these things. it's a pain, right? So for the sake of just texturing things for farm sim, there is a much simpler way to do this. And that's what I'm going to show you right now. So get yourself out of here. All right. First, I want to delete these objects here because I don't want those for my example. Get rid of those. Now, I want you to go up to edit and go down to preferences. Okay, make sure you are on add-ons because this is a free add-on. It's included with Blender, but it doesn't come activated by default, right? So go up here to your little search bar up here and click in node. We're looking for something called Node Wrangler. All right, so when you see Node Wrangler come up in that list, make sure you check the box and activate it. All right, now once you activate it, there's a lot of different things you can do with Node Wrangler, right? And this thing is worth its weight in gold. I promise you it is. It does so much that I'm not even going to touch on, not even a fraction of it in this video. That's something that's your homework assignment is to go on the internet and research Node Wrangler. Find out all the different things it can do for you when working with nodes. It simplifies the process like you wouldn't even believe. All right, so we're going to add this simple brick texture again, right? And this time I'm going to add all three textures, the specular, the normal, maybe even the height map. Maybe even I'll throw that in there just for the sake of it's going to be easy. I'm not going to have to look for it 4 or 5 different times, just one time, right? So click on this principal BSDF, right? Click on that, hit Shift, Control, and T. A window is going to pop up and it wants you to find the files that you want to use. So from here, I'm just going to go down to, now I have to go back through that same process, go through data, go through maps, go to map US, go to textures. All right. And now I'm going to go back down to these brick textures, except I'm going to grab every texture that I need to complete this texture. So I'm going to grab the diffuse, the height, the normal, specular. So all four of those I'm going to grab in one fell swoop. I'm just going to grab them all, and that's going to be the end of it, right? So let's minimize that. And I'm going to just click on this principal texture. I don't even know what that says underneath there, setup. Anyhow, click the blue button, right? So to add those in there. Now look what you got. All right. So that definitely simplified things. You did not have to go through setting all of these things up, adding each individual texture. Let me see if I can get in there. Oh, I already was in the big window. So you didn't have to go through setting up color versus non-color. It did that for you. You know, it set up a nice mapping node for you, texture coordinate node. It set that up. Even this node for your normal map and your displacement map. It took care of that for you. It plugged everything into the right places. It just made your life tremendously easier than what it was before. All right. And of course, if we go back and we have a look, everything is plugged in just the way it should be. No problems, right? So definitely Node Wrangler. Remember that. It's worth its weight in gold. You're going to need that, right? And this goes for any texture that you're working with, can all be added the same way. It doesn't matter what you're working with. If you're working with like PVR textures, if you're working with, your base game textures, some kind of homegrown texture that you made yourself, doesn't matter, can all be included the same way. And this Node Wrangler does a lot more than just that. It lets you do any number of things. Like if I disconnect this, let's say this displacement node here, say if this is disconnected, oops, take this out of here. This is just a quick example, right? And say I had this color plugged in up here, which doesn't go, but let's just say I have it there for whatever reason. I did something wrong. Later down the line, I realized, oh, you know what? I needed to put a displacement mode in there. I could just drag this up between the two of them, let go, and there we are, right? It plugs itself in. Do the research on it, look up Node Wrangler, look up the instructions, and just learn all the amazing things that this can do for you when working with nodes. All right. After that, nodes become a lot less confusing. One, because you you don't need to know how to manipulate them. You don't need to know how to move them around, to set up, any kind of like a mapping node. None of that stuff. It'll do it all for you. All you're really worried about at this point is including a texture, right? You don't want to know about nodes and including this and that and moving things around and drawing lines and connecting the dots. None of that. Doesn't matter, right? Shift, Control, T, go find your textures, plug them in, and keep moving forward. That's all you need to know about. This is something that you can take a deeper dive into somewhere down the road, right? Right now, we just want to get our damn texture into the model and keep working, right? And this will definitely take care of that for you. All right. So we got the brick texture in there. Easy peasy. Now we need to, well, you can see the brick texture is included up top there, and we don't necessarily want that, right? So I want it, a different texture on the bottom. But right now, this brick texture is the only one that I included. So I am going to have to make another texture, another material, right? So I can put the cement in there. So we're going to go to the plus sign, add a new texture, go to new. All right. And we'll call this one, I guess, cement, because that's what we're going to make it. Call that cement. Now, here's something a little bit different, right? So if we hit select, you can see that nothing shows up, right? Because we need to tell that where we want that cement to be. So you're going to have to pick these areas. So pick, all the faces where you want to have, cement show up. Like this bottom, I want to put it down there. So click assign because we want to, oops, I just assigned that to brick. Go down to cement, click assign. There we go. And I want to do the same thing with the top. Now with the top, I can probably, however you guys find it the easiest to grab all of those faces, whether you use like your wireframe mode or you just collect, click those faces individually one by one. That's kind of up to you, but you need to select the faces that you want, to assign this material to. So assign that. So now if I hit select, you can see my top and bottom areas showed up just fine. And then the same thing for brick. If I hit select, just that area. Okay. And then from there, go back into your shading mode. All right. Well, make sure cement is highlighted. If it's not a big deal. So when you're in your shading mode, right, you want to look right here at the very top where you can see it says brick right here. Okay. That's not what I want, but you don't really want to grab this drag down and change it. Cause what you're doing is uh, you're changing what this selection is. Instead of brick, you're telling it you want it to be cement. See that? You don't really want to do that. All right. The way to do that is just get yourself either make sure you're in object mode and select the object. Uh, if you have two different objects, right, is to select the object that you want. If not, go into edit mode and select that face and then tell it, okay, I want to put a new texture on cement. Just make sure cement comes up here. You don't want to change that manually, right? Use your model to change that. If not, you're just going to change the textures. Like I said, right here, I'm just going to tell it cement and I just changed that and I didn't want to do that. All right. So use your mouse, click on your model. All right. And from here, just click on the principal BSDF, shift control T. All right. Now what's nice is it'll bring me back into the window that I was just working in. Now I'm going to cruise down a little bit further here and I have concrete that I want to use. I'm going to use, I guess just this first one, right? Because I use this one a lot for streets and sidewalks, stuff like that. It has, even has a height map with it. But I don't necessarily need that for that one. This one, I just want the concrete diffuse and the normal. Okay. And then I'm going to click add. All right. And you can see that already showed up. Now there's a little bit of work that needs to be done outside of here. Cause like I said, our bricks are just way too big. Our concrete looks a little bit stretched out. Doesn't really have that good of a look to it. So there is some work that needs to be done. All right. So unfortunately, I'm not going to get into that in this video. Just because, like I said, we'll be here all day if I get into everything, but we will need to learn about UV unwrapping, right? So we're going to unwrap this. We're going to learn how to unwrap our model and assign it to a UV map, right, to our texture and tell it which faces get which colors, which orientation, how far we want it zoomed in, that type of thing. We can really finish up our models and have them looking really good once you get into UV unwrapping. And like I said, it depends on what you're working on, right? So with giants, UV unwrapping isn't super critical. Now it helps to know how to do a proper unwrap, to unwrap things properly to get that desired effect that you're going after. But in some cases, like if you're doing a giant house, you're moving things in the substance painter, you have to make sure that everything is unwrapped into separate islands, nothing's overlapping, nothing's touching, everything is the proper texel density. We don't have to worry about any of that. We can overlap if we want to. We can get as messy as we want to in Giants Editor. It's fine. Working with the atlases, it's okay. All right. And I'll go over that in the next video. For now, like I said, I just wanted to go over just how to get those textures in there and working with nodes. Do not let those nodes intimidate you. They're nothing special. Nothing special at all. Maybe when you start getting into some procedural stuff like geometry nodes and stuff like that, it gets a little bit more confusing. But these are extremely powerful, right? You don't need to use image textures. You can actually create your own texture right within Blender, right? You can give it a shininess, you can give it its color, you can add scratches, any number of things. Man, if you really start watching some tutorials on these things, and I haven't gotten it down. I could do basic things with them, but they are capable of amazing things. Amazing, right? But it takes learning it. So they're like I said, they're not it's not no slouchy like just this is how I assign my texture. You can do a hell of a lot more than that with it. We just happen to be using it that way by assigning textures. That's all. And like I said, you don't even need the nodes if you don't want to. You know, you can do everything from right over here. But when it comes to adding like your normal node and stuff like that, then you're going to need to be in there working with your nodes. All right, but that's it. That's as easy as that as assigning textures, and not a big deal, right? We needed two materials in our case because we used two separate textures. But if both of these textures happen to be on the same texture atlas, we would have only needed one material, right? Easy peasy, not a problem. All right. As a matter of fact, if it helps you guys anymore, I'll show you how to do this second object now, since this is another object. Let me highlight that post. All right. And I'm going to get myself into the edit mode there. And I'm just going to tell it, which faces I want to be the brick texture. All right. So I'm going to highlight those. Now you can see that my materials are empty now, right? So that's not necessarily what I want. Now this empty because I went into a separate object, right? So my wall has everything's fine there, right? So I have my brick and my cement. But when I go back over to my post, I don't have any materials. All right, so you click on new, right, to add a slot. Now you don't want to click on new down here. What you want to do is choose which texture, because you already have these created. You don't have to recreate these. Just pick brick because that's what you want, and then it assigns your brick. All right, there's no problem. So now I'm going to get into some kind of mode where I can pick these top ones here. And you notice how I'm still doing all this in the shading node. I didn't switch over to UV editing. I didn't switch over to modeling or anything like that. You can do most anything from any one of these tabs that you happen to be in. Not a big deal. All right, so we selected all of these. I'm going to add a new one because that's going for cement. I'm going to drag that down here. Click cement. All right, so that is now cement. Oops, and you know what? What I forgot to do? Does anybody know what I forgot to do? That's right, I forgot to assign it. Okay, here we go. And then same thing here. I'm just going to grab those bottom textures there. I'm already on cement. I'm going to click assign. And then I'm going to get myself out of that 3D mode there. And there you go. You can see that all of these textures are in the correct places. They just don't look that great at the moment, and that's fine. We're going to clean that up in the next video, and we're going to get it looking much better. We're going to get it looking better. All righty. So that's going to be it. I'm going to wrap this one up. Thankfully, my voice didn't go out. I can feel it getting raspy here a little bit, but thankfully it didn't go out. And we got this done in a timely fashion. So like I said, look forward to learning about UV unwrapping and cleaning up our textures and getting them looking good. We'll do that in the next video. In the meantime, have a very, very happy, very safe, and just a wonderful new year all the way around. Alrighty, with that being said, Happy New Year. I am Bauer Brown, and I will see you on the next one.